We are in the second of our series called I Choose. And what we're doing in this series is we're actually looking at the choices that we make in life. You know, in Deuteronomy 30:19, let's take a look at that. Deuteronomy 30:19, this is what God said. God said, I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, do what? Choose. And he's trying to help us out, right? He said, I'm going to help you out. Choose. Don't choose death. Don't choose curse. Choose life, that you and thy seed may live. But why does he tell us that? Because here's a principle that I want us to see. Who you and I are today and who you and I are going to become in the future is a direct result of the choices that we have made and that we will make. Choice is the most powerful thing that God has given to us. So in this series, we're focusing on 4 big choices that we have in life. Last week, we talked about choosing purpose over popularity, and we learned a few principles. One, we learned that when you try to live for the approval of people, it will keep you from the purposes of God. Trying to live for the approval of people will keep you from the purposes of God. Then we discovered that purpose and living for purpose has 3 powerful benefits to the individual. One, it helps to diminish distractions because the enemy and people are going to always try to distract you from what it is that God has for you to do. It pushes you through pain, trying to fulfill the purposes of God. Christ being birthed in you is going to always carry with it pain. I know we were told when we became Christians that give your life to God and everything's going to be perfect, everything's going to be fine, you're never going to have a bad day the rest of your life. And we all know that we walked with Christ for a period of time, that wasn't true. But purpose pushes us through pain. And then we discovered lastly that the power of purpose is that it empowers us to please God. It empowers us to say yes to God. You can't please everybody, but you can please God. Next week, we're going to talk about choosing discipline over regret. Now, all of us in life at some point, sometime, as we just discussed, are going to experience pain. Can't get away from it. You can't escape it. But here's the choice we have. The question is whether we're going to choose the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. How many of us have ever experienced regret? All you have to do is live, and you'll experience regret. So we're going to talk about that next week. Today, I want to talk to you about a big choice that I believe every single one of us are going to need to make in 2018. And that choice is we're going to have to choose between surrender and control. Between surrender and control. Now, let's be honest. I need some participation from you. How many of you would say that in some area of your life, you love to be in control? Raise your hands. Tell the truth, shame the devil. Absolutely. Absolutely. You wish that life was controlled by your remote control. Brothers, tell me something. Ain't it powerful when you have the remote in your hand? No matter how bad your day's gone, no matter what's happened, you come home, you sit in your favorite chair, and you pick up that remote control. And now all of a sudden, the world submits to the press of your thumb. See, many of us, we would like to have a remote control for life. I just hit that button. Boom, my spouse automatically switches, change. Boom, my kids, boom. My boss at work, boom. God, boom. All of us battle with some area of control. Wanting to control at work, wanting to control our kids, wanting to control our relationships. Do it my way or don't do it at all. But here's something we need to understand. Whenever we try to control something that's not ours to control, we're actually trying to be like God. My wife used to always tell me, you ain't little Jesus. See, when we try to be like God, that's a problem. And what actually happens when we try to control things, what we're actually trying to do is reduce the possibility of something happening that we are fearful of. The more we try to control, it's more what's the word I'm looking for? Indicative. Indicative. Thank you. Hey. Get that woman an extra bonus point. It's more indicative of the fact that we're fearful because we haven't learned to surrender. The more we're afraid of losing control, the more we try to control. And then soon what begins to happen is the thing that we fear has come upon us. The only pathway to freedom for you and I is to be able to surrender. What does that look like, though? Because that's more easier said than done, right? Much more easier said than done. Look at Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. It says, trust in the Lord. Now, we all know this verse, right? I could take this off the screen and probably all of us here could quote this by heart, right? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways. Some of your translation says acknowledge God, right? But all your ways acknowledge God or submit to God, and he will make your paths straight. What is Solomon telling us? That's a key to understanding the difference between living a life of surrender or living a life of control. It begins with trust. See, I can surrender to what I trust. Let me give you an example. Let me give you a living example, right? I don't like elevators. Don't like elevators, right? I don't trust them. So when I go into a building or something, first thing I have to do is I have to assess, do they got their stuff in order? If I get stuck up in here, is there a maintenance guy on call? Or are they going to have to call the fire department? I'm going to be in here for about 30, 40 minutes, maybe 2 hours waiting. I don't trust. And so it's hard for me to surrender. I want to control. And the way I control is I take the steps. See, when we don't trust God, we won't get in his elevator. We'll try to do it ourselves. See, but the answer is trust in the Lord with all of your what? Heart. And if I trust God with my heart, watch the contrast here. Trust God with all of your heart and don't lean on your what? See, surrender is a matter of the heart. See, when I trust God with my heart, it'll allow me to operate and function beyond what I understand. See, my understanding may be limited. My understanding may be driven by my fears. What we have to do is come to the place where we're willing to trust God, because we'll never surrender to that which we do not trust. But it says in all your ways, if you trust God with all of your heart, in all of your ways, because you're not leaning on your own understanding, you'll submit to God. You'll do it God's way. You'll say, God, here's the remote control of my life. I'm done taking control of it. Here you go. But again, that's more easier said than done, isn't it? Because we like to be in control. Is there anybody in the room right now at this moment that's willing to take a step of liberation and freedom and admit to God and in a room full of people, raise your hand and say, Lord, I admit I'm a control freak. I am a control freak. I am a control freak. Last night my son was making tacos. right? And if I hadn't put this message together, I would have done what I normally do. Do it like this, son. Do it like that, son. And then before you know it, I'll move him out of the way, and I'll be browning the beef. How many people can attest to that? Sure. All of us struggle with the issue of surrender versus control in multiple areas in our life. The question is, how do we get to a place of more consistent surrender and less control? First, let's turn with me if you could. First, let me hit you with Psalm 37:7. It says this. It says, surrender yourself to the Lord and wait patiently for him. Surrender yourself to the Lord and then do what? How? That's the hard part. That's the part that causes us not to want to surrender because we don't want to be patient. We want it on our schedule, our time, and our way, right? How many people can attest to that? Sure. Let's look at this circumstance. Turn to Genesis chapter 16, verse 1. You all know the story of Abraham and Sarah. And God comes to Abraham and Sarah. They're both old, far past childbearing years. And God says to Abraham, Abraham, I'm going to give you a son. And through your son, through your seed, shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, and your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky. And Abraham, the Bible says Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him as righteousness. But here's what happened. After that promise was made, time went by. And in the process of time going by, old Abraham and old Sarah, nothing happened. That's what we pick up in 16:1. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, she had borne him no children since the promise was made. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. And so she said to Abraham, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Watch this. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. You see what the problem is already? She said, I know what you said, God. I know what you said. But see, this thing ain't working as fast as I want, so I'm going to put a fast forward on this. I'm going to fast forward this thing, God, because it ain't working like I want it. And she says, I can build a family through her. And so, listen, what does Abraham do? Fellas, we've all been there at times that, I ain't going to fuss, I ain't going to fight. All right, that's what you want, okay. So Abraham agreed to what Sarah said. Now watch this. God promised, but it wasn't happening on her timeline. Wasn't happening fast enough. Wasn't happening the way she wanted. So she took out her remote control. Now watch this. Said, go sleep with Hagar. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years. Now, that's an interesting statement to be made in this story. Right? That's kind of out of the blue. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years. I'm going to come back to that. Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. After they had been in Canaan 10 years. Now, if you know the story of Abraham, Abraham and Sarah were living in the Ur of the Chaldees. They were moon worshipers. Down there minding their own business, howling at the moon at night. God comes to Abraham and he says, Abraham, I want you to get away from your family. I want you to get away from your friends. And I want you to follow me. And I want you to go to a place that I'm going to show you. And so Abraham left, not knowing anything about this God. And over the course of time, this God had proven himself to Abraham to be faithful. So for 10 years, God had provided for Abraham. But even though God had provided for Abraham for 10 years, even though he had been living in the land of Canaan for 10 years, God providing and being faithful, he couldn't wait. He had to take out that remote. He had to do it his way. He had to do it on his time. See, for many of us, we've walked with God for a long time. And there are areas in our life where we know God has been faithful. We know that God has fulfilled his promise. God has fulfilled his word. But yet there are areas in our life where it ain't working the way we want it to work. So I got to. He slept with Hagar as she conceived. Control gone wrong. You might say, well, they got a son. God promises them a son. Yeah, but that wasn't the son God promised. And the son that they birthed, because they wanted to control rather than surrender, the son that they birthed is Ishmael. All of. This is the consequence of taking control. All of the world's, not all, wrong word. The majority of the political unrest in the world today, and the main driver for the unrest in the Middle East today, is because of this act. Because they wanted to take control. And the Arab nations are the descendant of Ishmael. And the Arabs have been fighting against the Jews for centuries. Why? Because the Jews are the descendant of Isaac, the son of promise. And Ishmael is the Arabs are the son of Ishmael, the son of the remote control, the son of we can't wait on God, we got to do it our way. And because of that, the world has been in chaos and constant conflict since then. Here's a question for you. What chaos is operating in your life because of your Isaac? What chaos is going on in your heart because you chose to pick up the remote control rather than surrender to God? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think about an area right now that you're trying to control. Think about it. Be honest with yourself. What is it? Is it a person? Is it a thing? Is it a circumstance? I want you to give it a name. Call it what it is. Give it a name. Because, my friends, that area is probably one of the hurdles to you realizing in your relationship with God the thing that you want to realize. Are you trying to control your kids? Any of us who are parents, we raise our hand to that. Are you trying to control your grown kids? Any of us that got grown kids, you raise your hands to that. Trying to control your grown kids because they ain't raising your grandbabies the way you would? Are you trying to control your finances? Are you trying to control the future of your career and your job situation? Are you trying to control your spouse? Or are you trying to control your image? I got to manage my brand. I got a name out there. What is it that you are trying to control? You see, in so many different areas of our life, we are wrongly trying to control where we should be surrendering. In 2018, the challenge for you and I as we look at the beginning of a new year is where and how are we going to surrender to God and relinquish control? I want to give you three big questions that are going to help you to answer When is the right time for me to choose surrender over control? When is the right time for me to choose surrender over control? You know, one of the most difficult things for me, right, just as a practical example, one of the most difficult things for me, when I'm sitting and I'm watching TV or watching a game or something, you got people over, you know, one of the challenging things is to give up that remote, right? It seems like an innocuous thing, a little simple thing, right? But how many can relate? When you give that to somebody, they got control over the TV now. They got control over what gets on the screen. And that's uncomfortable. Or when you're riding with somebody and they don't drive the way you want them to drive. Now, couples, don't acknowledge anything. This is reflective. This is therapeutic. But how many fights have you gotten in with your spouse over driving together? Because they won't do this, they won't do that. Why they turn it? Why you drive like that? You should have gotten that lane. You should have got that. Yeah. It's all about control. It's all about control. So here's 3 questions that are going to help us to understand what are the right circumstances and situations for us to choose surrender versus choosing control. Number 1, first question we need to ask ourselves: is it worth my concern? Is it worth my concern? Is it something I should be getting upset about? Remember the story of Mary and Martha here in Luke 10:41. Everybody's gathered at the house, right? Martha's in the kitchen. She cooking up cornbread and collard green. She making the mac and cheese. She frying the chicken. She got the ribs in the oven. And here's Mary sitting out there in the living room, hanging out with Jesus. She here in the kitchen sweating and toiling. She comes out, Jesus, will you tell my sister to get her tail up in this kitchen with me? But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all of these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about, and Mary has discovered it. It will not be taken away from her. You see, Martha was caught up in the details, but Mary understood what was really important, that thing you were trying to control right now. Here's the question: is it worth it? Trying to control that thing, being caught up and overly concerned about it, is it causing you to miss out on what's really important? You see, surrendering to God starts with evaluating what really matters in my life. What really matters in my life? You see, what Jesus was trying to tell Martha is this: don't sweat the small stuff. Don't sweat the small stuff. The problem is sometimes we're tripping and we're flipping out about things that really aren't that big of a deal. You ever just lose it, and in the middle of losing, you're like, what am I doing? I'm losing it. My God, I can't stop it. And here's what's happening. Because we're flipping out about things that aren't really worth our concern. Details that really in the bigger picture don't matter. We're hurting our relationships. And we have to ask ourselves, is this worth my concern? Is it really that big of a deal? For example, is it worth my concern? Is it really worth getting upset and freaked out and wigged out about making everybody miserable because somebody didn't fold the towels right? Because somebody left their plate in the sink. You know the stuff that flips you out. You know the stuff that sends you over the edge. You know the stuff that turns you from a sane, rational, mature thinking individual into a looming maniac. Is it really worth it? I know sometimes we think it is. But here's the question: 5 years from now, will it matter? And then here's what happens when you're a parent and your kids get older. and you're sitting around having dinner, and your kids start reflecting on how they grew up and stuff, and they start telling you about the stuff that you did and stuff you flipped out about when they was young, and you go, God dang, I was like that? Wow. Is it worth it? Is it really worth getting upset over? Trying to control things that really don't matter in the long run. Because here's what happens. What we don't realize when we refuse to surrender and we choose control is that we're hurting our relationships. We're hurting our intimacy. We're driving our kids crazy over things that we have to ask ourselves, is it worth my concern? That doesn't mean you just let dishes pile up in the sink, you don't do anything about it. That's what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. Is it worth my concern in terms of me trying to control everything and then flipping out when the remote doesn't work the way I want to? Because Jesus said, when you do that, you miss the really important things. And then 5 years from now, will that really matter? So you got to let some things go. Because here's the deal. Here's a principle I want you to understand. In relationships, you can either have control or you can have intimacy, but you can't have both. You can either have control or we can learn to surrender things to God and have intimacy, but we can't have both. Is it worth my concern? Second thing that we need to question ourselves and ask, it ain't worth my concern. I'm done flipping out about how the towels are folded. I'm done with that. Second thing, is it mine to control? Is it worth my concern? Is it mine to control? I like what 1 Thessalonians 4:11 says. This is deep theology, deep philosophy, and this is deep revelation that I think can really help all of us this morning. This is deep and this is profound. Watch what Paul says. He says, and that you study to be quiet and to do what? This is deep. This is deep. Mind your own business. Deep. It's deep. That's profound. That's profound. Mind your own business. Stay up out my Kool-Aid because you don't know the flavor. Mind your own business. Is it mine to control? Is it any of my business? Now, you don't have to raise your hand. Don't look at anybody. Everybody look straight ahead because you're telling yourself. But how many times have you tried to control something that wasn't even any of your business? Honestly, most of the time in areas we're trying to control, many times it is our business. It is right for us to try to exercise a level of control over it. Because how many of us know that God won't do everything for you? Right? God wants you to do some things for yourself. So in other words, God says, I shall supply all your needs. Right? Stay in the bed every day and don't go out and get a job. And see if UPS is going to show up at your door with a box that says needs supplied and everything you need in there. There are some things that God expects us to do for ourselves. We have to work out our own salvation with trembling and fear. But there's a big difference between surrendering control and relinquishing responsibility. When God says, I want you to trust me with all your heart, I want you to don't lean on your own understanding, but in all your ways submit to me, surrender to me. He's not saying just give up responsibility for the things that we know we are responsible for. For example, If you're messed up financially and you need to get some breakthrough, just sitting around not having a job ain't going to help you. Some things that you can do. Don't spend so much. Spend less. Get a second job. Do something about what's in your area of control. If your marriage is in trouble, what can you do? You can adjust your heart. You can take responsibility and ownership for your attitude. You can examine yourself. You can seek out counseling. You can make sure you sign up for Sacred for. God doesn't expect us to completely surrender that responsibility. That surrendering doesn't mean giving up responsibility. It's recognizing I have a scope of action that I need to take. I'm not going to try to control it, but there's some things that I need to do. If you got a kid that's making bad decisions, stop trying to control them and work on building a better relationship. Keeping open communication. See, the point is that we need to do whatever we can do to improve the situations that we're responsible for, and recognizing and discerning the difference between trying to control it and doing what I'm responsible to do. Look what Philippians 2, verse 12 to 13 says. Is it mine to control? Is it mine to control? Because if it's an area that it is mine to control, look what God says. He says, work hard to show the results of your salvation, obeying God with deep reverence and fear. Why? For God is working in you. Why? To do what? Giving you the what? Desire and power to do what pleases Him. Whatever it is in your life that you need to surrender control over, but recognize that there's a scope of responsibility in that surrender that you have, God is saying, listen, I got help for you. That even in taking responsibility for areas, I'm still relying and depending on God. There's still an element of surrender that I'm relying on God to give me the power and the desire to do it. Working hard to do our parts results from trusting God within us. Trust God with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. See, when you lean on your understanding, you're going to pick up that remote. You will. Because your understanding is limited. You only see what you want and how you feel and what you think and the outcome that you're afraid of happening. So you will pick up that remote. But God says, no. Let that go. Give it to me. And then here's what. Let me use the remote on you to control you and to empower you to do the things that you're responsible for. The right way, for the right motives. Third thing for us to think about. So the first one is it my concern? Or do I need to mind my own business? Or am I flipping out over things that really don't matter? Sweating the small stuff. Second thing is it mine to control? Is it within my business? Is it part of my responsibility? If it is, I have to trust God to give me the power and the desire to do it the right way. If it's not mine to control, I need to mind my own business. And those of us that got grown kids or in relationships, it's hard, but you need to mind your own business. You know how you felt when your mother-in-law or father-in-law was getting all up in your marriage. That was for somebody. That was for somebody. Third thing we need to ask, is it for God alone? Is it a circumstance or situation that only God can deal with? You see, at the end of the day, there are always problems that are simply too big for us to handle on our own. They are the God-sized issues that we need to release completely to God. It's too big for me, too much for me. I'm tapping out, crying uncle, asking for help, waving the white flag. Look what Philippians 4:6 says. It says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Because you know, sometimes we can lie to ourselves, right? When I ask you to do that exercise, close your eyes and think about what you're trying to control. You know, some of you might allow the enemy to tell you, you ain't trying to control nothing. I ain't trying to control nothing. Here's how you know what you're trying to control. What's the circumstances or situations that make you anxious? You see, when my son was up there making them tacos, I was down in the basement. I was like, ooh, is he going to put the onion and the garlic powder in the meat before he browns it? Ooh, I don't know. He'll tell you. I kept asking him, you follow the instructions? Because my whole thing is when you cook, this is my whole thing. My family knows this is my control freak thing, right? You know, when you cook, follow the recipe. Follow the instructions. There's a whole lot of science and research that went into the instructions. So when I see people that aren't following the instructions, I get anxious. I get anxious. I get worried. So the way you can tell whether or not you're trying to pick up the remote control of life is what areas in your life make you anxious. And so when God says be anxious about nothing, he's saying put down the remote. Stop trying to control that situation. That's why you're anxious, because you're concerned about can you make the outcome the way you want it. God is saying put down the remote. Give up control. Choose. Surrender. Watch this. How do I do that? I hear you, brother, but how do I do it? In every situation. Every situation. That means recognizing that he's God. Always. Not sometime. Always. So in every situation, watch this. By prayer and petition. There's two words that might seem the same. Prayer isn't what we think when we think prayer. Prayer really means to acknowledge God, to worship God, to acknowledge who he is, his nature, his name, right? And then petition means to ask. See, we think prayer is asking, but prayer really is I am communing with God on a spiritual level. And communing with God on that spiritual level, I'm recognizing who he is. I'm coming to him realizing you are God alone. And Lord, you are the Lord and you're the sovereign of my life. There is nothing that is unfolding in my life that you haven't foreseen. You have a divine purpose in it. It's acknowledging that. And then the petition part is the asking. And the asking really isn't, Lord, I want them to do what I want them to do. Anybody ever pray a prayer like that? Lord, would you make them see this? And what you ain't really praying for them. You're really praying for you to get the outcome that you want. See, the petition is, Lord, I'm hanging on to this remote control as it relates to this relationship. God, I've been trying to change my spouse. I've been trying to hit the rewind. Won't work. I've been trying to hit the fast forward, Lord. It won't work. Right now, Lord, I'm just hitting pause and I'm inviting you into my heart. And I'm surrendering the control that I've been hanging on to so long. And I'm asking you, Lord, to do a work in me. See, that's how we do this thing. Watch this. Prayer, petition, with thanksgiving. See, I start thanking God in advance for the outcome before I even see it. See, that takes faith. See, because in control, what makes us fearful is we are not certain and convinced of the outcome. So we got to put a hand to it. See, in faith, I've surrendered the outcome to God, knowing that whatever he makes it and allows it to be, it's part of his purpose and plan, not only for the other person in the situation, but also for me. And then lastly, I got to present my request to God. Stop talking to your friends. Stop talking to other people about the things that you want to control and why they aren't working out the way you want them to work out. We do more talking to other people than to God. See, he says, I got to present my request to the one who alone can handle it. If I'm able to do that, here's what happens. Because when I'm a control freak and I'm trying to control things, remember, I got this anxiety. But here's how I can tell whether or not I have effectively given it over to God. Verse 7. Watch. And the peace of God. The peace of God. Now watch this. Watch this. The peace of God. Watch what this peace does. It transcends all what? All understanding. What is it that God is telling us not to lean on? Our own understanding. Ooh. You see, the peace of God that comes, it transcends your understanding of the situation. That's why he says, don't lean on yours, because in yours there's no peace. But when God's peace comes, it has the ability to transcend, to move beyond, to take you above, to take you beyond, to take you deeper than what you can see as an outcome in that situation. The peace of God. Knowing he's got it. He's going to work it out. It's okay. And then here's what it does. When that peace starts transcending, here's what it does. It guards. That word guard, it means to garrison about. It's a military phrase. It's like building a fort or a garrison to encamp about something. God's peace actually protects, watch this now. It actually garrisons about, protects two things. Two things. It protects your what? See, because the heart is the thing he told you to trust God with. See, when you trust God with your heart, he will protect that thing from being damaged or wounded. When you trust people with your heart, they can't protect it from being damaged and wounded. That's where church hurt comes from. Because you thought you were trusting God, but you were actually trusting people. When you trust God, and you don't lean on your own understanding, and you give this situation up, and the peace of God comes in, it takes you beyond, it transcends your understanding that he doesn't want you to lean on. That thing comes in and it guards your heart. Watch this. Not only does it guard your heart, but it does something for the thing that he's telling you not to lean on. It guards your mind. It keeps you from going crazy. It keeps you from being up in the middle of the night. How many people have been there? You up in the middle of the night. That thing is just going on and on. Why she doing this? Why he doing this? Why they doing that? Why they come out of this? Oh my God, what they gonna do? Oh, how's gonna come? Oh. Peace. You see, when I choose control over surrender, here's what I'm choosing. Here's what I'm choosing. I'm choosing anxiety. I'm choosing stress. I'm choosing chaos, because eventually my control is going to go wrong. Like an Ishmael, I'm birthing Ishmaels into my life that are going to create problems and troubles for me. But when I choose surrender, what I am actually choosing is peace. choosing peace for my heart. I'm choosing peace for my mind. And I'm acknowledging that God is God. I'm giving up the remote of my life.